further debate, I recognize the member for London West.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I'm going to start by stating the obvious, Speaker. Of course, Ontarians do not want to see this province plunged into an election. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We have to deal with almost 100,000 backlog in testing cases. We have to deal with the chaos that is unfolding in our schools. We have to deal with the potential devastation of the virus once again through our long-term care homes. We have to deal with the complete unraveling of our small and medium-sized business sector as small businesses face the very real prospect of closing. All of that is the highest priority for the people of this province, not going into an election. However, the concern that we have with this motion is that Ontarians are also very clear that they do not want more of the same, that it is this government's policy decisions that have been made from the beginning of this pandemic, and particularly now as we are well into a second wave that everyone knew was coming, and that all kinds of advice was given to this government about what needed to happen to protect Ontarians from the effect of this second wave. But this government chose to ignore that advice. And so, Speaker, we do not need more of the same. We need to deal with the issues in our assessment centres, the COVID assessment centres, as people wait hours, have to come back day after day to try to access a test. And we know that now they're moving to an appointment-only system. But there are real concerns that have been expressed by experts that is going to underrepresent the actual spread of COVID in our communities. Limiting testing, reducing the number of symptoms that will trigger a COVID test for children, that's not the way to deal with the assessment issues in this province. I would point to a column that was in the Toronto Star this weekend by Bruce Arthur. And he calls the Premier's response to all of the issues in the assessment centres. He calls the Premier's response an incoherent, sclerotic mess, and the failure of the testing is a trembling pillar. So, Speaker, Ontarians expect this government to deal with issues like testing because they understand how crucial that is to contact tracing and to understanding where COVID is going in our communities. Unfortunately, this government announced some changes last week that really only tinker around the edges. They do nothing to get at the real problems that we are confronting in this province. They are ignoring the advice of scientists, epidemiologists, physicians, many of whom commented last Friday on the new measures that were announced by this government. Dr. Michael Warner, the medical director of critical care at Michael Garron Hospital, said, "Let's be clear, the Premier, the Minister of Health are willfully choosing not to follow the directions of Toronto's Medical Officer of Health." Dr. Yanni Friedhoff, Associate Professor of Family Medicine at University of Ottawa, said this is an ongoing abject failure. Dr. Kate Dupuis from Sheridan College says it's up to individuals now to protect our communities. Our government isn't going to. No one inside your home except for people who live there or provide necessary care. The Ontario Hospital Association said given the rapidly growing number of COVID infections within the City of Toronto, the OHA unequivocally supports the request by Toronto's Medical Officer of Health for stricter public health measures in Toronto. Ottawa Public Health says our healthcare system is in crisis. Labs are working beyond capacity, causing dangerous backlogs, which affects our contact tracing and case management. Hospitals are nearing capacity, and we're seeing more outbreaks in LTC homes. Our system can't handle much more of this. So we need the government to step up and take on these critical challenges for the people who live in this province. And in particular, for parents of school-age children who are deathly afraid of what is happening in our schools. We're seeing more and more parents opting for remote learning rather than in-class instruction, because they see the failure of this government to take action that's actually going to protect students in our schools, to put a cap on class sizes of no more than 15 students, and to ensure that the PPE is there, the HVAC, the ventilation improvements are there to actually protect students and education workers. But again, in the Toronto Star on Sunday, another great column revealing that this government has actually invested very, very little, the minimum amount that it possibly could, into trying to ensure the safe reopening of schools in Ontario. So, this government talks a good line about how much money it's spending to keep kids safe, but in fact, it has barely spent $400 million out of the $103 billion that it actually claims to be investing. We need a government that's going to be looking at what actually has to happen in our schools to keep education workers and students safe. In our long-term care system, we had almost 2,000 deaths of residents of long-term care homes in the first wave, and there are real concerns about what's going to happen with this second wave. We're still not providing long-term care home workers the PPE that they need and put the protections in place. Actually created that iron ring that the government likes to talk about to ensure the safety of residents of long-term care homes. Speaker, we saw a recent report from the Canadian Medical Association Journal that compares what happened in the first wave in Ontario to what happened in BC. And it found that there was a much higher rate of death in Ontario than in BC, and it warns that Ontario has not learned the lessons of that experience in the first wave. So, Speaker, how can we ensure, as we brace for the impact of this second wave, how can we ensure that Ontarians are going to be protected? I would suggest that it's not by introducing a motion that says, that the government should call an election on June 2nd, 2022. The problem is not the date of the election, Speaker. It is the electoral system within which this province operates. It is an electoral system that rewards governments to determine when they're going to call an election based on when it's to their political advantage. We saw that in New Brunswick with the recent election that was called, because that government, which actually had been doing a pretty good job, a much better job than this government, quite honestly, Speaker, in involving all members of the Legislative Assembly in decisions about how to respond to COVID-19. So that government, as a minority government, had been doing that work, but it saw an electoral advantage. It saw an opportunity to translate its minority status to a majority government, and who can blame that government? That's what first past the post, that's what it means. That it rewards that kind of decision making. So that government was able then to elect a majority government, and now is able to unilaterally, just as we saw this majority government, make decisions moving forward for that province. So, Speaker, in my capacity as critic for democratic reform, I wanted to point out some of the advantages of moving away from first past the post. and looking at a system of proportional representation as the most effective way to ensure that the problems associated with COVID-19, the risks to the people that we represent can be dealt with in a much more collaborative way, a way that involves, the ideas of all members who are elected to represent the voices of our constituents. And we know that countries, there's research that's been done, countries that have systems of proportional representation have been much more effective in their response to COVID-19. They have experienced, fewer deaths, fewer hospitalizations, fewer people on ventilators. All of this is well documented in the research, and that is because those countries operate in a system of negotiation, of compromise, of hearing from different sides of the table so that they can make good decisions that actually respond to the priorities and the needs of all of the people of this province. Speaker, we also, I just do want to give a shout out to Fair Vote Canada that just recently put out a paper called Building a Better Democracy. And I encourage all members in this chamber to take a look at that paper and review the benefits of proportional representation to build a better democracy. Because, Speaker, democracy is more than about elections. Democracy is about engagement. It's about citizen participation. It's about feeling that the government is responding to needs that have been identified by the people who are represented. And certainly, Leger just recently did a poll, and they asked Canadians questions about democracy. What do they care about in democracy? 97% of Canadians responded to that poll. They said they want a system that encourages parties to work together more in the public interest. They want a system that encourages elected members to work on longer-term solutions to problems rather than quick fixes. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Further debate?